Hi guys and welcome to the channel, it's Goffy here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about this. This is a camera that is loved by so many people, especially street photographers. We're going to have a little bit of a deeper dive into whether I still love this camera as much as I did in my initial impressions. In my initial impressions video I waxed pretty lyrically about this camera and I absolutely loved it. Now it's been a month and the rose tinted glasses have come off. Do I still love this camera just as much as I did a few weeks ago? So let's start with the main event, which to me is all about the little lens on the front of this thing. This is a 23mm f2 lens. F2 I find, especially on a crop sensor, that perfect balance between too much background blur and just enough that you can kind of highlight your subject. And because of that, I end up finding myself shoot this camera wide open pretty much all the time. It's very sharp wide open, and if you stop down, you just get more performance than you could ever imagine out of a camera this size. Shooting wide open is easy even in bright sunny conditions because it has a little ND filter built into it that you can turn on and off, and it literally means you can shoot at f2 in bright sunny conditions. In my previous video, I did mention the leaf shutter quite a bit. So in my initial impressions, the leaf shutter actually enabled me to get a photo that weekend that I don't think I would have been able to get without a leaf shutter, and that was a picture of this robin, and I was able to shoot in a fast shooting mode where I captured lots of images and it didn't scare the robin away because it is really quiet. Now a month in, I don't think I really get much benefit out of it being a leaf shutter. To me, there's very little that it offers me. Now there's 2 or 3 things with this camera that have actually meant at times it has replaced my iPhone. Now this isn't something I expected, but hear me out a second. So first of all, this camera is very small. It's small, compact and lightweight, meaning I take it pretty much everywhere I go. Second of all, the Fuji emulations are so good that I find myself not needing to edit images. That, along with the wireless communications with the camera and the iPhone app, mean that you can quite literally take a picture with this guy and upload it to Instagram in less than a minute. Now another aspect of this camera that I spent an awful lot of time talking about in my initial impressions video was the optical viewfinder. So this has a hybrid viewfinder. You can use both an EVF and you can use a digital viewfinder, and there's also a bit of a hybrid mix between the two. A month in, to be honest with you, I rarely use the optical viewfinder anymore. The EVF in the camera is very, very good, and you get to see obviously all your exposure and what the image is going to look like, and I find myself using that far more often than I do the optical viewfinder. That's not to say that it's not really good and it's not a really handy system, and if you didn't have something like a Leica M6 like I do, then it's probably something that you'd really enjoy using, but it does feel a little bit halfway house. If I want to use an optical viewfinder, I'll probably pick up my Leica. If I want to use a digital viewfinder, then it's either this or another digital camera. Now another thing that I love about this camera is the close focusing distance. This isn't something that I think I mentioned in my initial impressions review, as it's not something that I thought I cared about all that much, but close focusing with this camera is actually quite convenient, especially again for travel, lifestyle, that sort of photography. Really simple things like taking a photo of my Starbucks cup, or taking a photo of a nice meal or a coffee, or things like that that again typically I want to share on things like social media. This camera is again very convenient for that. There's a couple of things with this camera that probably go without saying that I really enjoy, and a lot of that is to do with the controls and just using this camera. It's an awful lot of fun to use. All the manual controls like the aperture ring, they have really nice feedback. Changing the ISO, using the little like floating dial and the shutter speed, it all feels very, very natural to use. The only thing that I probably do have a slight complaint about in terms of handling is the shutter speed dial is actually quite stiff. Now that might sound very, very small, but something that's very, very good with Leicas is you can hold the camera to your eye and change the shutter speed really quickly with your thumb. Now to change the shutter speed with your thumb on here, and I'm not sure it's just my camera, it's actually really, really quite stiff and quite hard to do. So that's probably my only complaint in terms of handling when it comes to this camera, is just that little shutter speed dial, and it'd be nice if it was just a little bit easier to change. So next up, let's talk about some of the slightly bad things, or things that just don't fit my personal style. Now first up, one of those is the focal length of this camera. I said in my initial impressions video that I wasn't sure about the 35mm full frame equivalent for an everyday camera, and a month in, I think I still feel the same way. I personally wish that this camera was a 28mm camera, and you then had the option to use the 26 megapixels to crop to both 35 and 50. Instead, this camera is a 35mm camera and you can crop to 50 and 70. And I never find myself using 70, so I would rather it was the other way round and you got that extra bit of width. But that's my personal preference and it's going to change depending on who you are. Good thing is there are adapters out there that let you do it. You can buy a little adapter that goes on the front that does turn this camera into a 28mm. It does increase the size of the camera quite a bit, but it is possible. But it is an added cost and something that you need to buy separately. A couple of the default settings straight out the box that annoyed me. One of them is the touchscreen automatically takes a photo. That sounds like a good thing, but honestly it's a pain. The amount of times that you leave your camera on and then you pick it up and you touch the screen and it takes an image means you end up with an awful lot of images that you don't want and you just didn't need to take in the first place. Another one of the default settings is the joystick. Now the joystick on this camera actually sticks out and it's quite easy to move around. I find where I wear my camera around my neck or over my shoulder that joystick ends up hitting my body or my coat and actually moving, and that then moves the focus patch. When I then put the camera to my face and I want to take a photo, I noticed that my focus patch is in the wrong place and have to move it back to the middle. And that's a little bit annoying. I imagine there is settings to turn both of these off. I have found the setting to turn the touch to take a photo off, but I haven't currently found a setting to turn the joystick off. So if you do know how to turn that off, let me know down in the comments. It would make me a lot happier. One of the other things with this camera, and I mentioned this in my initial impressions review as well, was the autofocus. There's nothing that wrong with the autofocus, but if you're used to a new mirrorless camera, then the autofocus in this does feel quite slow. It's a bit like using an old iPhone that's a few generations old. At the time you thought it was rapid, but when you then go back to that phone and you start using it again, you realize how slow and clunky it feels, and it feels a little bit like that. It's not actually a problem, but from a user experience point of view, it does feel a little slow compared to what a lot of people will have grown used to. Now, unfortunately, there is one pretty big problem with this camera, and that's that the Fuji X100V has started to cost me quite a lot of money. And by quite a lot of money, I mean, like, yeah, quite a lot of money. I've honestly fallen in love with the Fuji X100V to the point that it's made me jump pretty deep into the Fuji ecosystem. There's so much to love about Fuji cameras that, well, it started to replace some of my other cameras too. There's a lot of these boxes that haven't featured yet on the channel, and they will be featuring on the channel very, very shortly. So if you like Fuji content, please consider liking and subscribing as well. There's plenty more Fuji content coming. If you do have any questions about the X100V though, then feel free to hit me up down in the comments and I'll try and get back to you. If you've enjoyed this video, please, please, please do not forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Cheers.